Is this thing on? Welcome to Rebooted the Podcast. I'm your host, Alita Hernandez. Come join me weekly to hear about my journey from recovery to healing after having a stroke and other life challenges. So let's get talking. Hi, everybody. I'm Alita Hernandez, Rebooted the Podcast. I'm back again with an expert guest, of course, always. And her name is Duygu, right?
Duygu. Yes.
Duygu. I tried. I told you I was going to mess it up.
Very good.
And you are a clinical counselor and working with psychotherapy and dealing with people with trauma, correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
And where are you located?
So right now I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Okay.
Yeah. I worked for many years. I worked in New York City, and now I work in San Francisco Bay Area, and I predominantly work with trauma survivors.
So let's just get into it. How, so you've always been working with trauma survivors, and trauma is a big word. So trauma means everything from death to whatever. I mean, I can't even, sickness. I mean, there's so many things.
Yes.
But the whole purpose, like I contacted you because you came out with a book. You co-wrote a book called The Rewrite, and it is a trauma workbook with creative writing and recovery for our new normal. So, yeah, I want to talk about that, how that's helping your patients, and, how's that going for you?
Yes, thank you so much. So actually, the way the book started was after the pandemic, the need for mental health services was so much more. And I saw that in my own practice as well. So a lot of my patients would actually request for more sessions. And the writing exercises I developed to address this, to stretch the therapeutic process outside of the 50 minutes. To help people to kind of regulate themselves and build self-awareness. Because with the pandemic, of course, a lot of the coping mechanisms were not accessible anymore. People couldn't socialize, couldn't do the things that they normally did to regulate themselves. So that's why I started using writing a lot more in my practice. And then it just became a book.
It sounds good. I've done different, spoken to different people, and many of them do journaling. I'm not one to do journaling too much, but a lot of people, it helps a lot to write down like where you are at now, so you can go back to read it. So it's kind of it is interesting to write things down and then wait a little while, and then go back, because it shows your mental state, correct? When you're writing.
And also when it comes to writing, actually, like if we were to simplify the brain, like there's the thinking brain and then there's the emotional brain. So when we're writing, actually what we want to access is the emotional brain. So the context is really not necessary. So the story is not necessary. It's a tool to get to the emotions related to the event. But what we actually want to access is the feelings that these events create in us, and process them and to understand them. So so sometimes people would write like all the details of everything that happened and who said what. And if that serves to access the feelings, that's great. But if it interferes with the context, interferes with understanding our feelings, then I would use prompts to help the client to go a little deeper, a little further into the emotions, into the feelings, where things are a little uncomfortable, but it's also necessary. It's necessary to get there. Yeah.
Right. So do you find that with your, you're there as a counselor, a therapist with a person, so it's a different, how can I say it? When you speak to a person and they're telling you, it's a different part of the brain versus when you write it?
I mean, there are certain things. I mean? Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's certain things that we can't access with talk therapy. So, which is why actually somatic work really works for trauma, the body awareness, because, for instance, sometimes there's even not a story for the trauma. If something happened when we are 1 year old, we don't really have the language to describe what happened to us. For instance, if we were in an accident and someone was killed, when we're one, we can't really tell the story, but we still have the emotional reactions. We could still have certain trigger responses, and we can still have trauma symptoms. So this is, in the past, maybe this wasn't necessarily considered workable, but now it's very workable. So now actually, we don't even need the story. So what we need is to understand the triggers, the awareness, the self-exploration, and regulating the body is what leads to healing.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I've been learning that doing my podcast. I've been learning so much about that, about really honing in on the triggers that push us, right? That because I used to have panic attacks. So it's taken me, and it started when I had postpartum. So it was a combination of the giving birth, moving, a whole bunch of stuff that I went through, right? And
Yes.
then just recently on one of my podcasts, I talked about it, how I felt the panic attack coming on the other day for something else I was going through, and I didn't want it to happen. And I actually shut it down. Like I talked myself out of the panic attack. I said, no, I'm not gonna, it doesn't serve me. Go away. I don't need this physical, condition to deal with what I'm going through. And it took me a little bit, but I literally, I was coming up to here and I brought it back down.
Yes,
So
that's a fantastic example, actually. That's exactly the goal of trauma therapy, is to be able to you move the trigger from a reaction to an unknown reaction of disproportionate to what's happening in your world at that moment, to something like catching it. And it's going to be like something that's a nuisance, something annoying, like, oh, I'm triggered again, something like that's what we want. We want it to be that you notice that you're triggered, and then you have the mechanism to regulate your body.
exactly. And I think it's learning how to control it. I think, I don't know, me personally, what I found is the panic attack is fear. The body is reacting to fear, whatever kind of fear it is, doesn't matter what it is. Fear of losing your house, fear of losing your car, whatever, fear of being sick, whatever it is. And when I finally realized it's fear that's triggering the panic attack, then I had to do a deep dive and go, why am I afraid? It's because you're losing control. You feel like you don't have control. So the minute you take control, then you can deal with the panic attack. Did I say that? I think
Yes, definitely. That's
so,
definitely.
And interesting, when I first started going to college so many years ago, I was going to be a psychologist. I started to do that. I started studying that. And then what happened was I didn't understand back then about how to separate the emotion from the person. Me emotionally, I was too invested in people.
Yes.
So it was tiring. I'm exhausted. Like, I feel like I was taking their trauma and carrying it with me.
Yes.
So I said, I can't do this job. I'm too emotional. I care about people too much. So I didn't pursue it, but now I'm helping people other ways. So
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. Your podcast gives a lot of information to people. It's it's very important what you do.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, it's very important what you do. And how are your patients doing with when did the book, when did the rewrite come out?
It came out a couple months ago in April.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you've been using already with your patients?
Yeah. So I was already, a lot of it actually, as I said, I was already using it in sessions. So, and during the pandemic, of course, it was a difficult time for us too. For me and my husband. Our families are in Turkey. That's where we're originally from. So before the pandemic, for us, it was just the world felt small. And we always had the idea that if anything happened, our parents are aging, we could just jump on a plane and get there 24 hours later, but still get there. But now with the pandemic, of course, that was shattered, that idea. So we felt very helpless in many ways. It was very scary for us. So in some ways, actually, it was a way that we coped with the pandemic ourselves. I mean, we also did watch a lot of Netflix, but we, by writing the book, it just helped us, gave us purpose, gave us hope, and was a creative outlet for us. So, and then seeing it used by a lot of my clients now, it's just, it's a good feeling.
No, that is good. That is good, because I know that there's still people out there, and hopefully whoever watches this podcast will reach out to you or any other counselor, therapist out there that's local to you, because there's help out there. So people have to understand, don't feel alone
Yes.
in your trauma. A lot of people out there got ill. I had COVID, a lot of people had COVID or other illnesses, and they're still trying to recover. And there's a lot of people that are alone.
Yes,
That
definitely.
that is really, really, it breaks my heart to know, because during COVID, we moved in at my aunt's house. My aunt's 83 and my mother's 85. So we couldn't leave them alone. So we all
Oh.
moved in. So we all live together now. It's a big house of 5 people and 7 animals, and but it's all therapy for each other. So we
Yes,
help each other out, because the animals are therapy too.
of course.
They stay with
Very
my aunt and everything like that. And thank God that we had each other, because like you said, your family was in Turkey.
Yes.
So, and we had family, like my husband's family is in Puerto Rico. So
Mm.
even though it's three hours away, we couldn't go.
Yes, exactly.
We couldn't go. And when we finally did go, I think we went in 2021, we went. It was a whole ordeal with the vaccine, the card, the test, it was like, it was so much trauma just
Yes.
to get somewhere. And people are still suffering with that, because I hear people talking about it. I still see people with masks on,
Yes. Yes.
you
I mean,
know.
there was so much loss and so much grief during the pandemic. And actually, it's a global traumatization, because what
Yeah.
trauma is the notion of all the tools that I had until today will work tomorrow. That notion gets shattered, or the resources that I have today will also be there for me tomorrow. That this notion gets shattered as well. So even if things aren't great, the idea that today is going to be similar to yesterday is what gives us security in some ways, and makes it so that we know how to navigate our lives. So this pandemic shattered this. All the resources that we had, things that we relied on, weren't accessible to many of us. And there's still a huge impact of it,
Oh, yeah.
especially on children,
Yes.
because for us, for adults, we still have some idea of how things were and how to relate
Right.
socially. But for children during COVID time, with schools being out, it was very difficult for them. It was very scary. They couldn't really process and grow and there's a catching up to do
Mm.
now.
And I wonder how many parents don't even realize how much trauma their child has gone through. Because that's
Yeah.
another thing, that sometimes as parents, we do the best that we can, but it's very difficult to, know everything. You just don't know. And, there are a lot of little kids out there. So I'm hoping parents, if you're listening, check yourself. You can get the rewrite book and start helping. And even for the children, that you can probably do a smaller version of that. Maybe the parents can talk to their children and start having them do journals, because a lot of kids have journals, diaries that they
Yeah.
can, have a let out, I know my sons, they were gaming, right? So they talk to the community of gamers, and they have friends on there. So they were able to talk to each other. But that's also scary too. It kind of scares me, because some people are so, they're so completely disconnected from society now. Have you noticed that? That the COVID lockdown has made some people completely really regress and go back introvert inside the house, like they don't leave and things like that. How do you
Yeah.
address with people like that? Have you seen people like that are really having a hard time
Yes,
really
of
getting
course.
back to normal, like getting back to society, basically?
Yes. And a lot of people either lost their jobs, a lot of people work from home. So the little, even the little socializations that we used to do, like going to the grocery store. So going to the grocery store was a whole different experience during COVID. And or even for me, I had an office. Now I'm virtual, and when you have an office, you have colleagues that you
Exactly.
just chit chat and exchange resources. And with COVID and the pandemic, of course, this has to be much more intentional. So right, it has to be something that's scheduled. So right, for instance, a therapy is a very lonely job.
Mm.
So you really need to have your community and your consultation groups and other professionals that you can discuss cases with or get resource ideas from. So in the past, this was much easier. Trainings were in person. We went to offices. Meeting another professional for coffee was much easier.
Right.
So now it has to be so much more intentional. We have to actually put it in the calendar and make sure that it happens, because we are humans and we thrive in connection.
Yes.
That we need connection. We need other people to regulate ourselves, to express our pain, and to express our joy. Laughing and humor, all of these actually really contribute to our mental health in a very positive way. So we need it.
And music is very important.
Yes.
I
Very
live
important.
with music, so I have a studio. My husband's a salsa singer, so we have a salsa orchestra, and my mother is a pianist. My father was a pianist, so I've always been around music.
Yeah.
And since I've been here at the studio, we have an event space that we do parties and birthdays and all these different things. So we always have events with music. And in the beginning we had a smaller crowd, but now we got a big crowd. We had 100 people here on Saturday. Everybody's
Oh,
having a good time, dancing salsa, having some drinks, and everybody's like kind of getting back to normal, you know?
yes.
And just understanding that we can't be afraid to be with each other.
Yes.
There was a lot of there's a lot of things because people spend so much time on television. If you I might per se, I don't watch the news. I pick and choose what I want to read. That's what I do. On my, because your phone, right? It gives you
That's smart.
I just pick and choose what I want, because if you sit, I used to be a person that used to sit and put CNN on and have it on all day if I was home. And if you do that, it makes you kooky. I mean,
Yeah.
personally, you can't be listening to something all the time, because then it just conditions you, constantly conditioning you. So I just find pick and choose what you want to read, what's important to you, right? So you can
Yes.
at least have a more control of your emotion and what you're feeding yourself.
Yeah, because you're in constant stress. Actually, what you mentioned feels very important, the dancing and the music. It's such an old way of healing, right?
Yeah.
Dancing has been used for healing since humans were on this world. So it's and when we're talking about, when you just asked the question before about talking and can you access certain emotions through talking, actually dancing is an amazing healing method to access parts of ourselves that we can't go with words. So it's an amazing release. And there's a lot of movement meditation and movement practices that involve dance therapeutically. So I just think it's a very important, very beautiful practice. And I've seen so many people heal with it, actually.
Yeah, it's been really, one thing is to dance, like to go to a club and you dance your favorite music and stuff like that. I transform. Like I grew up in the era when we had no cell phones. So I'm 58 years old. So I grew up in the late 70s, 80s, when all we had a little boom box. I grew up in New York. I had a little boom box. I carried my
Yeah.
little boom box around with my music. Used to go roller skating, and we're always around music. Always around music. Anything that was going on, we were always dancing or roller skating, and that was part of my life.
Yes.
So even till now, when we do freestyle night, like 80s, 90s music, I'm a little kid again. I'm like, yeah, I'm dancing. It's like I
Yeah.
forget everything. I forget anything, no pain. You have no pain. You forget. My
Yes.
mother, my mother's still dancing at 85 years old. She dances salsa till 2 in the morning.
That's amazing.
I
That's how
have to
I.
drag her out. I have to drag her out. She's like, Mom, we have to go home. No, I want to stay. The music's still on. She'll keep dancing.
Yeah, that's really.
Yeah. So, but that's awesome. That's awesome that you're doing this and that you're helping the people in the community. And we need more people like you, to just, reach out to others out there. And I know some people it's hard because of the cost. but I know there's different ways. There's insurance. There's different ways they can get therapy, correct?
Yes, yes. And it's getting actually changing some with the pandemic. There's much more, for instance, groups now, and the groups are more accessible. They used to be limited to the space, to the area that you were in, but now with virtual therapy and virtual groups, it's more accessible. So yeah, definitely. And it's what you said is very important. Definitely, it's important to ask for help. We nothing happens on our own. I actually learned this writing a book. So many, it happens with so many people contributions and support anything that we do. So it's really important to allow ourselves to be vulnerable and to ask for help when we need it, because we all need help.
Yeah, and not to be embarrassed. Like I tell people, asking for help to go to a therapist, there's the old stigma. The old stigma as a little girl, I remember, is like, if you go to a psychiatrist, you're crazy. It's a horrible way to put it, but that's how people would say, "Oh, I'm not going to a therapist." And then your culture too. My family's from Puerto Rico, so we have the Hispanic culture. There's also a thing about like the macho and machismo. A lot of men don't want to go to therapy. Oh, I'm not going to ask for help. I'm not going to ask for therapy. There's nothing wrong with that. So I
Yes,
try to make sure, listen, out everybody out there, it doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, there's always help, and just ask for help. Even if you ask somebody, hey, ask your brother or somebody, say, I really need some help. Then maybe somebody else can guide you that way.
definitely.
If you feel uncomfortable calling a doctor, then talk to somebody, go to the church, talk to a pastor, talk to a rabbi, whoever's like close to you, that you can have a little bit of openness and say, I need some help. I really need to go to somebody. Who do you recommend? Right. I mean, that's all we can do is try to guide them to the water. Right.
Definitely. And that's actually something very important to me. Is one of my missions to reduce the stigma around therapy and asking for help. And it's interesting that you mentioned the machismo, because in my private practice, it's pretty 50-50. And it's so interesting to notice that a lot of the men that I'm working with, their close ones, their loved ones, don't know that they're in therapy. So they don't really talk about it. And I feel like this is so important to make sure that we understand that we all need help, and it's okay. Yeah. It's actually, I always say to my clients that it's courage. It requires courage. So the fact that you are seeking help is actually strength. It's not weakness.
Exactly. So they have to understand that strength. You got the strength to actually make the call, go sit with the therapist and discuss your issues. And hiding it from your family is not good, because they can help.
Yes.
If if I say, look, I'm really having a hard time, sometimes they don't understand. That's the whole thing too. But if you tell them, look, I'm going to help because I have X, Y, and Z, then they'll be supportive with you. At least most families, I believe, or somebody close to you should be supportive.
It's also modeling. For instance, it's modeling for our children when they know that their parents go to groups or get help with parenting or get help with working through their trauma. Then it makes it possible for the children in the future, when they grow up, to do the same for themselves. And that's what we want. We want our children to find resources, right? That's what we want them to find ways of healing and ask for help. So it's really important to model that in our communities and in our families.
Yeah. I have two sons. They both went through trauma because their girlfriends broke up with them, or they had whatever that they broke up. And my older son was with her for like 2 years, and he sought out help because he said, "Mom, I really need to talk to somebody, more than you." But he talked to me as well, and he did what he had to do, and he's great. He's doing wonderful, and I'm so proud of him because he did that. He's 27 years old, and he was man enough to say, "Look, I'm not handling this well. I need to talk to somebody."
Yeah, that's really, really important, because the things that we avoid actually don't go anywhere. They still are there.
It's not like a cut. When you get cut, it heals and it closes up, right?
Yeah.
But when you have trauma, that trauma is open until you deal with what it was, or I guess like that you face it. You have to face to face, like say, I went through this, or It's taken me a while. I've gone through some traumas in my life too, and it's been steps, little steps, every time, just, to get through the, okay, I got through this trauma. All right, what else do I have to release,
Yes.
So, but,
Yeah.
but so anyway, where we can get your book, everything's on Amazon or on your website.
Yes, so it's Amazon, and there's also a lot of information on my website. I have a newsletter where I send out any updates. Yeah.
So they can go to your website, and I'll write it down later. I have it. I think I have it here. But anyway, I'll put it on the link here when I put the podcast up.
Yeah.
And that way they can go to your website. They can sign up for your newsletter and get information from you and learn about the workbook.
Yes. Yeah. Sure.
Great. Is there anything else you want to add? I don't know. I think we covered a lot of different things.
Yeah, it was a great conversation.
Yeah, like I said, I do it naturally. It's easier. I kind of like let my spirit flow with it and see what comes out, because it's all interesting. I love meeting different people and their experiences and how they're helping others. I just want to connect the dots and connect people like you and me and all those out there that are helping others to live a better life.
Yes, and thank you for what you're doing, because these conversations are important. We have to talk about these things, even if they're uncomfortable.
Yes.
The only way change happens by talking about things.
Yes, definitely. I appreciate you, and thank you, and have a great weekend.
Thank you so much. You
All
too.
right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Stop. Thank you for joining us today. Don't forget to follow us on social media at Rebooted the Podcast to learn about each episode's guests and topics. This is your host, Alita Hernandez. See you next Tuesday.